LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's go to our first caller. Victoria is in Greenwich. Hi, Victoria.
Hi, how are you tonight?
Very well. What would you like to ask?
I'd like to know how much trust can we actually put on these COVID inquiry to ensure that the facts are properly given to the people?
Margaret Beckett, you probably have more experience of inquiries in Parliament than many others. Do you have confidence in this inquiry, and what do you think the parameters should be?
Well, I don't know enough yet because I wasn't. I didn't hear what the Prime Minister said today. I mean, I've heard about it, so I don't know what the details are. I think it doesn't look good that it's not due to start taking evidence earlier, or apparently set up for quite some time. Even if he doesn't intend it, it looks as if it's staged to be a political get-out for him, and that's not good. So that shakes one's confidence a bit. The key thing will be who leads it and whether it's a person who can be... I know there's all this thing about a full public inquiry and judge and all that. That needs to be looked at because we don't want it to go on for 10 years, not least because if the scientists are right, this may not be the last pandemic we ever see, and we want to learn the lessons as soon as we can. So... I've got an open mind about it. I haven't got lack of trust in it yet, but I'm wary.
What do you make of the argument that the Prime Minister put forward that the reason, and he said, look, I acknowledge a lot of people would prefer this was earlier, but he said it's important that particularly the scientists and the medical people who will have to prepare their evidence, that they have time to do that and their eye is not taken off the ball over next winter. Now, there seems to be some logic to that, doesn't there?
Yes, there's a logic to it, but it's awfully convenient, isn't it? I'd really like to hear from them whether they think they need to take that long. And a lot would depend on what happens over the coming weeks and months and what the conditions are in the winter. If we're really, really fortunate, winter might be quieter than last winter. Let's put it that way. Let's certainly hope.
Well, let's hope so. Bob Seeley, your reaction?
Hi. To be honest, the most important thing is that we pledged to do it. I completely agree we need one. It is incredibly important. We have to learn, and A, because we don't know it won't happen again, but B, because you should always aim to learn everything you can from these things. And the issue is not about passing the buck or blaming or pointing fingers, but it is, a lot of people are doing their best. Mistakes clearly were made because we had a casualty rate that, depending on how you articulate it, ran into very high 5 figures, 6 figures. If you look at a country like Taiwan, population 21, 22 million, deaths about 30. So clearly we need to learn, absolutely. I trust the Prime Minister on this because he has got a point. Look, if you start it now, the people who are still dealing with it are also going to be preparing their evidence and what they need to be saying. I do think having some sense of perspective, I think, is valuable. I think if you start it after next spring, then I think it begins to lose its value in the sense that we move further away from it. So I think if it starts within 12 months or so, then I think you have something which is timely, but we've got some perspective and some distance from the immediate events, especially for those health professionals, statisticians and others who are involved. I would love to ask a lot of questions of these people, including what's the name of that statistician from Imperial College? Ferguson? No.
Neil Ferguson.
Neil Ferguson. I'd love to know about some of his predictions because he has a track record of some astonishingly high death toll predictions from foot and mouth going back 15, 20 years. And I would be fascinated to hear about some of whether he thinks his predictions were accurate or indeed wildly exaggerated. But there is a lot to learn from across the board, not least from the politicians.
Clarke Carlisle, as the non-media, non-politician person on this panel, do you understand the lack of trust that some people will inevitably have in this type of inquiry? Because I think after the Iraq inquiry, people lose trust in inquiries when they don't get the outcome they want. That's the problem, isn't it?
It is.
I suppose that could be a factor that contributes to the problem, but I would say a greater factor is when the inquiry is seemingly undertaken, reports published without any input from society itself. It seems that those who are selected to give evidence and the evidence that is utilised within these reports comes from very select sources. I mean, you talk about the Iraq inquiry. You only need to go to last year and the race inquiry chaired by Dr. Sewell. For any inquiry to say that there is only anecdotal evidence of racism in this country, and that's not sufficient to show that there is a problem. How on earth can any society in 2021 have any faith in a government initiative?
So what would you do to try and increase the levels of trust in this type of inquiry?
One of the first things to do is to have it informed by the people themselves, and that is it would be a monumental task, but it is an incredibly important task to have a source that is accessible to the majority of society. It would be an incredible undertaking, but the reason why it is so important is because this pandemic has changed the course of our societal life, our societal norms, and our societal expectations. And the actions of Boris Johnson and the government have shown over the course of this pandemic that they aren't able to act incisively contemporaneously. And any retrofit to try and patch people up after, the previous show just had the police officer from the north who had long COVID, and he even struggled to articulate the adverse mental health that he is struggling from long COVID, and that's a very direct case. The vast majority of us, if not all of us, are now susceptible to adverse mental health issues. All it takes, according to NICE, is 6 weeks of prolonged stress or anxiety. It's been a 15-month pandemic. This can't be retrofitted. This has to be informed from below, and support structures and answers given that are commensurate with the needs of the people, not the needs of the government.
Well, I would encourage, by the way, anybody to phone in about mental health. It is Mental Health Awareness Week this week, as you know from the programme that we did on Monday. And Clarke is a brilliant campaigner on issues of mental health. So don't want to direct the questions, but a little guidance maybe. Joan Smith, you've covered these inquiries through the years journalistically. Do you feel that the public should always have an element of mistrust in these things, or is it actually quite debilitating for sort of public life in a way if we always start from a position of scepticism?
I think it is debilitating, and that's why the independence of any kind of inquiry is incredibly important, both independence and how long it takes as well, because I'm glad Clarke has raised the question of mental health, because so many people in this country are bereaved, so many people have lost friends and relatives. The whole course of their lives has been changed by losing a parent or losing a husband or a sister. And then there's all the people on top of that who have long COVID. So I think I worry about the fact that it's going to take us a long time to recover from the impact of this pandemic, even when the actual numbers, are right back down to normal. So the idea of a protracted inquiry that doesn't report for ages or doesn't come up with very clear conclusions and recommendations, that would worry me. And I think, we've gone through such a crisis. So many people have suffered so much that we actually have to be able to trust what it comes up with.
Just a quick question to you all. If you can answer this in 20 or 30 seconds, I'd be grateful. What kind of person do you think should be chairing an inquiry like this? It would normally be a judge. But would a judge have the breadth of knowledge of the scientific and medical aspects of this? Should it be someone maybe from health administration? I mean, I'm not saying it should be, but I'm not so sure whether it should automatically be a judge. Bob Seeley.
Okay, firstly, I think that there's a difference between cynicism and scepticism. I'm sorry that Clarke feels so cynical about these things. Look, I'm an MP and I support the government. I'm sceptical about power. I'm sceptical about the influence it has. And I'm sceptical about government. And I support this government. Scepticism is good and it's a natural position. I'm supportive but sceptical sometimes. So there's nothing wrong in that because I need the government to deliver for my people. And that's my priority. But cynicism, I'm sorry, is a waste of time because just saying, no, everything's rubbish, everything's bad, it's all going to be a stitch up. What's the point? You know, there is a big difference between this government, which isn't perfect, and Russia and North Korea and lots of other governments we could name in the world. So skepticism is healthy, cynicism isn't. As regards to your question, well, they've got to have curiosity, they've got to have compassion. Actually, maybe a couple of judges, maybe three. I will put the point, I'll argue the case for the judges. I don't want somebody in health administration because they'll be looking after potentially their decisions. Judges are used to dealing with very complex evidence across multiple areas. There's political decisions, there's the health advice, there's the scientists and what they've been getting wrong and right, and the advice that they gave back to the politicians. All these complexities with people under a great deal of pressure. And actually, you need a good judge or maybe a panel of 3 judges to come to a conclusion, to take all the evidence, and above all everything else, this has to be open, which it will be. It has to be transparent, and we have to be able to see the evidence and the people making the decisions. Okay. But actually, I have faith in us to get this right.
Clarke?
I think Bob makes a very good point about the multi-layer and the complexities of all of the information that's going to have to be analysed and sifted through. So, you know, those with that as part of their working background, and judges, we don't we expect them to be impartial. And to take that independent perspective. So there would be a lot more faith if it was a judge. And again, I have to agree with Bob. I think if it was co-chaired or a panel of people, so that there can't be questions of one person directing the course of an inquiry one way or another, you know, anything that promotes rigour in the process, you know, and we know that there's been due diligence, there can be a greater amount of confidence in the outcome.
Joan?
I think it has to be somebody who's actually a public figure, who's trusted. And one of the things that worries me about judges is that they're often seen as a bit out of touch, and they're not always household names. I think it has to be somebody who isn't politically affiliated, doesn't have connections with any of the main parties. And I think given the complexity of it and that the fact that it's about a disease, a virus, that maybe it should be a distinguished academic or a doctor, maybe someone who's retired, so doesn't have a job to do at the same time.
It's quite difficult to think of anyone who fits that saintly category, isn't it? Margaret, of course, the Chilcot inquiry, that was a panel, and they had, I think, there was certainly a couple of historians on that panel. It wasn't all to do with a judge, but it was a judge that Sir John, I think, was a judge who led it. What's your view?
I think I can see the argument for a panel, and I'm very interested in what Joan just said. I think that's a really interesting idea. I mean, one person who crosses my mind who might fit those criteria, Martin Rees, who was the Astronomer Royal, because I take your, I can't remember who it was. Was it Bob who said you don't want a health professional because they'll be prejudiced and maybe defending their own corner. But to have somebody who has the scientific rigor and capacity to understand more of what they're saying, and without any discredit. I know there are judges who are very good, so maybe there is something to be said for seeing if you can think of a saint, as you say.
You're the nearest thing I can think of, Margaret, I'm afraid. So
no, I fail the criteria. I'm political.
You are indeed, as we might find out a little bit later. Sorry, who wants to come back there?
Yeah, just on, I think it's Margaret and Joan's point. I mean, actually, historians, let's do a shout out for historians. They're actually really, I think they're incredibly important at certain times. I remember the David Irvin Nazi defamation trial, which was very famous about 20 years ago. And the historian, Richard Evans, played an incredibly
my former history tutor.
Role. Sorry?
My former history tutor. He's a very great man. He's going to be on this programme in June as well.
No, he played an impressive role, because that was almost, it was a defamation trial, but actually it was a Holocaust that was being put on trial, and his evidence, I thought, was incredibly powerful, and has produced a number of books on the back of it, and incredibly good books as well, about not only the nature of that trial, but the nature of the Holocaust and how it's been presented in history. Yeah.
Right, we have a question on free speech. We're going to come to that in a moment. We want to cover all sorts of subjects over the next 40 minutes or so. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to my panel. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 8:16.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
19 minutes past 8 on LBC. Let's go to our next caller. Jack is in Barnet. Hi, Jack.
Hi, Iain.
Hi, Jack.
My question for the panel is, how does the government reconcile strict freedom of speech laws, the ones that have just been introduced, or proposed, against their own policy where they attempted to silence non-capitalist views in education about 8 months ago in September? Because I think actually that is what the students, as a student that studies education, I think that's what the student body cares about far more.
Just explain that. I'm not familiar with that.
So about 8 months ago, sort of hidden in the big curriculum policy for the national curriculum was a series of policies that basically set out the idea that nothing was to be taught that was not promoting, but nothing was to be taught that expressed anti-capitalist views or expressed views that went against the idea of British values, is the way that it got coined in the media at the time.
All right, Bob Seeley, free speech policy, they've announced a new bill in the Queen's Speech. We talked to the Universities Minister earlier in the programme. Is this really needed? Isn't it a sledgehammer to crack a nut?
No, I don't think it is. I'm sorry, I haven't got a foggiest what Jack's talking about, I'm afraid, unless it's Kemi Badenoch. teaching that white supremacy was not to be taught in schools, or white privilege, or some sort of tedious critical theory garbage, which no doubt we'll have a punchy conversation on now. I don't really know, so I don't know what Jack's talking about, I'm afraid, to put it bluntly. I do think we need to stop this ugly culture of silencing people and cancelling them and no platforming. I just think it's going to kill democracy over time. And moving on from that, I think critical theory, critical race theory, critical gender theory, all these sub-Marxist critical theories, I'm afraid to say I don't think fundamentally they're compatible with liberal democracy. Because if we are no more than the sum of our gender or the colour of our skin, we are then going to be limited by it. And all you do is you seek to pigeonhole people according to race and class and gender or transgender or whatever. And I think people are fed up with it. And I'm afraid to say, because the left intelligentsia that holds these views has hijacked the Labour Party, and the Labour Party is full of people, these views, I'm afraid to say electorally, it's going to be a disaster for any party that believes in this. Because if we're told we're all racist, and our past is racist, and our history is racist, and our dog's racist, and our gardens are racist, and our country houses are racist, and Granny's budgery is racist, I mean, sorry, where do we go as a society? So actually, we need to defend freedom of speech, and I really hope the Labour Party does, because A, it's important that the main opposition party does, but also if it doesn't, it's finished.
Can I come in there?
Go on, Joan.
So first of all, about education, I don't really know what the caller is talking about either, but I think the purpose of education is to challenge people and expose them to a huge range of ideas, and that's how they hone their intelligence and their capacity for critical thought. And it does worry me that we've moved away from that a bit. But on the larger question, I think we are in a complete and utter mess on free speech. I wrote a piece today about the state of the Labour Party, where, local, and I'm a member of the Labour Party, so anybody who actually expresses any view on the trans issue, for example, that doesn't actually completely accept an extreme gender ideology is accused of being hateful, of being transphobic. It's absolutely weird the way in which, the Labour Party has always been a kind of broad church where a lot of people disagreed with each other, but there was a kind of overarching set of ideas that we mostly agreed on about equality and things like that. And you could argue about the rest. That isn't the case anymore. And I personally have written to Keir Starmer very politely about this. Lots of my friends have written to him, emailed him about the nastiness that's spreading through the party, the inability to have free speech in the party. And none of us gets a single reply. We don't even get acknowledged. It's really, really shocking. So I think, the government is right in the sense that there is a problem about free speech, but I think it's cultural. And I don't think you deal with cultural problems by legislating in the way that they're proposing to do. I think it's about standing up for the idea that we're all robust enough to coexist with people who disagree with us.
And Clarke Carlisle, isn't it a case that the university vice-chancellors collectively need to grow a pair? Because if they had enforced freedom of speech on their campuses, there would be no need for this sort of thing. And this is not about protests against just people on the right, as Joan says. You've got Linda Bellos, for example, who was cancelled, I think, by, was it Oxford University? You've got all sorts, Germaine Greer. I mean, for goodness sake, Germaine Greer, a sort of mistress of feminism, if I can put it like that, she is being cancelled on some university campuses. This is going across the political spectrum. But Clarke, do you think that a law is needed here, or should it be down to the universities themselves?
Well, it's entering very dangerous territory when you're starting to legislate against free speech. And there are certain ambiguities in this modern woke age about the words that people use and retrospectively labeling people as A, B, or C without that understanding of Pinker's euphemism treadmill. What was once acceptable in 1805 isn't in 1905, and that's then reappropriated and isn't acceptable in 1940 and then isn't acceptable in 2000. And there isn't an understanding for the growth of us as society and as our acceptance and collaboration as a society moving into this era. Now, my personal opinion is that people should be allowed to express thoughts, opinions, to be able to debate, to be able to hopefully get people who are stayed in their position to view certain things from a different perspective and further enhance the experience of their knowledge and their inner circle. But the problem comes is when these thoughts and actions start to mutate or translate into when the thoughts mutate into actions that are based on beliefs that are narrow-minded, that are bigoted, maybe, that are discriminatory. So being able to articulate yourself in order to understand positions, in order to explain positions is one thing, but holding certain views steadfastly so that it actually affects actions and behaviours, which in turn affect the lives of others, is something that we always have to be vigilant against.
Okay, Margaret, Joan said some quite interesting things about the Labour Party's attitude to this sort of thing. You chair Labour's NEC. Is this something that regularly comes your way on the NEC?
No, to be honest. And I was very, very concerned and very sorry to hear the experience that Joan is describing, not least that she says that she wrote to people about it and didn't get a reply. That's always a difficulty because you get vast heaps of correspondence. But on the other hand, it ought not to happen. I think this is always a difficult area. On the one hand, and this is where I'm completely with Joan, there's got to be free speech. People have got to be exposed to different points of view in order to have an understanding that can go to some degree, at least, across society. And you've got to try and resist the notion that people should be, I know the fashionable word is cultured, but should be silenced is what we're really talking about, and prevented from expressing their point of view. All of that you've got to balance with the need not to behave or to say things that are so offensive that they are in themselves harmful and damaging. We were talking a moment ago about mental health. There isn't any doubt that there can be an atmosphere in which people are harmed by the things that other people are prepared to say, as well as the things that other people are prepared to do. So it's a very tricky area. And I think part of the problem is, this is going to sound terrible, and I readily confess to being very much now an older person, and I'm sure people will say that's part of it, but there does seem to be such a lack of courtesy and consideration. And I'm sorry to say that technological tools, which are very helpful, like email and social media and so on, they encourage people to rush out with opinions and statements very, very tightly phrased, without any room for nuance or much room for good manners and friendliness and kindness. And I think all of that is moving into a nasty, damaging package that we ought to try and overcome.
You've been reading my book, Margaret, and I noticed that you're not on. I noticed you're not on Twitter.
No,
well, shame on you. You're not on Twitter, and I'd keep it that way if I were you. Bob, you wanted to come in?
Just to say, actually, I agree very much with what Margaret is saying. I just think so many issues could be solved, not all of them, obviously, but a lot of things could be made better if people were just more considerate and more thoughtful. And I'm sure that goes for politicians including, so I'm not pretending to be perfect. The best way, I think Clarke and Joan made the point, and I'm actually delighted that Joan is saying this, because when you have people like Linda Bellos, who I remember, the son and the male sort of hate figure from the 1990s, the most Marxist woman in Britain, when you've got people like a Marxist like Linda Bellos being cancelled by these sort of flake students, I mean, my God, what's the world coming to? The best way of destroying stupid opinions is to have the transparency of open debate, is to have them aired. And actually what we're coming down to is silencing people who are not, we're not talking about people defending, the Nazis, or, we are talking about some people saying that Stalin was great, but that's another matter. But trying to silence people is actually a form of fascism. And I'm afraid to say what we've come down to now with all these woke academics and, as you say, sort of gutless chancellors and vice chancellors of universities, we have a form of virtual fascism where people are being bullied and intimidated out of jobs and being silenced. And it is corrosive and corrupting of our democracy. Do I think it's going to destroy our democracy? No. I think it will damage it, but I think it will fall away surprisingly quickly when finally we as a society say boo to it.
However, resist the notion that in some way the Labour Party is particularly prone to this phenomenon and it doesn't apply to any of the other political parties. I don't believe that for a second. Joan's experience, which I deplore, was in the Labour Party, and so inevitably, but you said, Bob, that it was basically a big problem for the Labour Party. It's a problem for society, not for the Labour Party.
Okay, I say that, but the intelligentsia, I mean, the sort of North London lovey classes and the academics are pushing this, and their influence in the Conservative Party is somewhat limited.
The greater problem in this issue is in silencing people. You don't actually change their opinion or perspective. You just suppress what they're thinking, and that's why we need open forum so that multiple opinions can come together, and those who hold opinions that we consider to be archaic or wrong or need addressing can have it hopefully adapted and informed by multiple opinions from other perspectives.
Yes, but I'm not saying that this is just the Labour Party, because I know it's happening in the SNP and the Greens. This issue is actually tearing a lot of parties apart. What I'm saying is that my experience, and I've been going to Labour Party meetings since my father took me when I was 11 years old to hear Harold Wilson speak. I have
That's
a long
almost
history
child abuse.
I was going to say, did you bring Esther Ranson? My goodness.
Very exciting. But my experience is that I have never known a moment in the Labour Party when so many women are afraid to speak up. I know Labour councillors who won't admit that they are gender critical, who are afraid to say at Labour Party meetings that they support women-only spaces in prisons, in hospitals, in refuges for victims of domestic violence. And this, what we're being told is that this is hate, that this is hate speech, and that we're transphobic and all of this. And I wrote to Keir Starmer 3 months ago. I can give you the names of lots of other people who've written to him. A friend of mine actually approached him at the hustings, and he said he had to catch a train. She should email him. She did that very politely, didn't even get an acknowledgement. There is a particular problem in the Labour Party, which has always been a party for feminists, and we don't feel it is anymore.
Well, hang on, Bob, because we're running very late. But just to finish on that point, Joan, by saying what you've just said, I can guarantee you that when you look at your Twitter feed after this programme, you will be assailed by all of these trolls who think that women don't have a right to speak out and say what you just said, which I'm very sorry that will happen, but I'm sure it will. We'll come to more of your questions in a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:33. Lucinda Horsley has the news headlines.
Ministers have confirmed plans to begin a public inquiry into the handling of the coronavirus pandemic next spring. The devolved administrations will be consulted before the scope of the process and its chair are confirmed. Boris Johnson has apologised unreservedly on behalf of the UK government for shootings in West Belfast nearly 50 years ago. Yesterday, a coroner ruled 10 victims killed in Ballymurphy during a British Army operation were entirely innocent. Israel says its forces have killed 16 members of a Hamas military wing in an airstrike on Gaza. More than 1,000 rockets have now been fired by Palestinian militants as part of the continued escalation of the conflict. LBC weather, showers dying out for most parts of the UK. Rain across parts of southern England, moving north into East Wales overnight. Drizzle in northern Scotland, a low of 5 degrees.
This is LBC. At Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:37 on LBC. Next week on Cross Question, we're going to be joined by the commentators India Willoughby and Ndidi Okezi, and also Dame Angela Eagle, and as yet unbooked Conservative representative. Right, we still have with us Dame Margaret Beckett, Joan Smith, Clarke Carlisle and Bob Seeley. They're waiting to answer a question from Jenny in Doncaster. Hello, Jenny. Sorry, it's Abbas in Redbridge. Hello, Abbas.
Hi there, good evening. So my question basically to your panel there is, why does the international community sit by and not enforce the borders that were widely agreed upon and prevent the loss of practically all of the Palestinian land?
Wow. Now, that we could take about an hour and a half talking about that, if not longer. I'm going to ask for relatively brief answers, if I can, from all of you, because we spent a long time on that last question. Former Foreign Secretary Margaret Beckett.
Because you probably end up in a worse mess than you were when you started. I understand and sympathise with your concern about observance of the boundaries and observance of international agreements. And sadly, this is one of the many places in the world where there are terrible faults on both sides. But the events that are happening now are appalling, and there is, as always, a terrible risk that they will get even worse. But if it was simple to enforce international resolutions, it would have happened a long time ago.
Joan, it feels like Groundhog Day, doesn't it, where you've got Hamas firing rockets into Israel, which are responded to by airstrikes from the Israelis. This has been happening several times over the last few years. If it was simple, it would have been solved. But do you think the world hasn't taken an active enough role in this?
I don't know how they would actually enforce the boundaries. I mean, presumably not militarily. And what I think about this is that this conflict has been going on longer than I've been alive, and that just shows you how incredibly difficult it is to solve. But what's happening at the moment, what is clear, is that this is how the conflict is perpetuated, because there are a lot of children in Gaza and in Israel tonight who are cowering in fear of another airstrike, another missile strike. And we know, and Clarke will know this better than me, we know that the impact of living in that kind of fear does to children, and children who grow up exposed to violence, it has huge impacts which last the rest of their lives. And what is happening at the moment on both sides is that they are ensuring that the next generation is drawn into this apparently never-ending conflict. And so, it sounds like a platitude to say both sides should stop. The violence isn't getting anywhere. It isn't actually serving either side, because the conflict just keeps going on. But that's what I think about is why can't people think about the next generation and all the damage they're doing tonight in both those countries?
Clarke Carlisle.
I'm in total agreement with Joan. Yes, studies have shown repeatedly about the impact of these environments on children, and not only that, the responses of these children, it's not inevitable, but it's incredibly likely that they will grow up with harbouring the need for vengeance, and they will then perpetuate these actions. Like I said, it's not inevitable, but it's incredibly likely, and it always happens when international society tries to intervene in situations, in the war on terror, putting these families in camps and stuff. What you're doing is actually harbouring the next generation of fighter for whatever that organisation is. Now, I'm not going to sit here and profess to know the answers, because I don't. And just like Joan said, one of the residing images of my childhood is Yasser Arafat and Benjamin Netanyahu meeting, on the news. It was nightly news for weeks and weeks and weeks. That's how long this has been going on. So why do we believe that we can step in and sort it out now? I don't. And I genuinely believe that international advice is one thing, but international involvement should be something very different. And this is a really trite comparison, but what if the international community started stepping in with the borders in Ireland? What would we feel like, if all of that involvement and confusion came in? It would throw a very complex situation into even greater disarray. And that's what has happened here in Palestine, and it will continue to happen as long as there are so many faces at the table.
Bob Seeley, isn't part of the problem here that it's in Benjamin Netanyahu's interest to play the tough guy here? It's also in Hamas's interest for these conflicts to happen every now and then to effectively cement their own position in Gaza. And as long as that continues, it's difficult to see a way out.
Yes, I mean, to be fair, look, I'll be critical of Israel in a second, but I mean, I think Hamas's role is rather more foolish in this and rather more morally questionable. Having said that, look, I think the two-state solution has probably been and gone. Israel doesn't need to make peace. It'll probably slowly swallow up the West Bank. Do I think that's good? No. And I think some of the stuff that they've done is really appalling. But having said that, they have a right and need to defend Israeli citizens. And when Palestinians are putting, bombs on buses and lobbing homemade rockets that go anywhere, that lobbing missiles into Israeli communities, Israel has a right to defend itself. So I think the Palestinians, what was it said about Yasser Arafat? He never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. 10, 15, 20 years ago, when the Palestinians were offered a two-state solution, they should have taken it. And the Israelis are just going to muscle the Palestinians out, I'm afraid. And it's a pretty miserable, awful state of affairs. It isn't going to get much better. But I think the world is no longer really interested. And I think actually the Arab world is beginning now to establish relations with Israel. They're not so interested in the Palestinian cause either. So I haven't the foggiest what the Palestinians are going to end up doing, I'm afraid. But I think whatever option they're going to go down the route looks bad for them, I'm afraid.
If I could just say one thing, I think
very quickly.
Part of the problem is I can only think of one time when both the Israelis and the Palestinians thought it was in their interest to have peace. That opportunity was missed.
Absolutely. When was that, Margaret?
We are going to talk more about this after 9 o'clock. I'm going to try and ask the question, how can we encourage the Palestinians to understand the Israeli point of view and vice versa? Because unless you understand each other's point of view, you're never going to come to any sort of agreement. And let me also tell you, tomorrow night at 8, we have the Israeli ambassador in the studio for an hour taking your calls. So that could be quite interesting.
There are some sorry to interrupt, there are some really good groups doing this, and I'm sure Margaret's met them. And when I was in the West Bank, you meet people who are very proudly Jewish or very proudly Palestinian, but actually understand the dynamics of this is just ridiculous for the very good reasons that Joan and Clarke that laid out. If you just
we will be speaking to
despair.
We'll be speaking to someone after 9 who's in Israel and is trying to work to bring Arabs and Israelis closer together. More questions in a moment. It's 8:45.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast, LBC.
Police in the dock over their handling of the Sarah Everard vigil on Clapham Common.
The last thing these grieving women should have been met with was visible manhandling by male police officers. I'm genuinely shocked by what I saw.
A dozen teenagers stabbed to death on London streets already this year.
An 18-year-old has been stabbed to death in East London, bringing the total number of teenage stabbings in the capital to 12 this year.
And warnings of an e-scooter crime wave set to hit London this summer. Lockdown might finally be easing, but the questions keep getting tougher for Dame Cressida Dick. But what will you ask the country's most senior police officer on Call the Commissioner here on LBC, Friday morning from 8.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Listen live on Global Player, LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 8:49, a text from Jenny in Doncaster. As it's Mental Health Week, shouldn't there have been more in the Queen's speech about tackling this growing problem? Clarke Carlisle, you have spoken and written extensively about mental health. I remember reading your book some years ago. It had a huge effect on me. What's your view of this question?
I think we as a society, are having an expectation of the powers that be that is never going to be fulfilled. We've campaigned for parity of esteem, or mental health and physical health. That's not happening. But what's most important, in my humble opinion, is the education of our society. We need to start to educate our children on their emotional literacy, on understanding the traffic light signal of adverse mental health issues. And we've got to start pushing that at a very early age, without drama and without sensation. It's such a passion of mine, and it tears me down sometimes to see that we have a government that is so tokenistic about the issue of mental health. We are on the verge. Before the pandemic of coronavirus, mental health was at tipping point. Services were overrun, they were underfunded, the staff were overworked. And now, coming out of the lockdown period of coronavirus, and people with their health anxieties, with societal, interaction issues, and all of the complications and frustrations that people will have, we are about to go into a new pandemic. And it is going to be mental health issues that may not be as disaster recovery as mine, but they're going to be extensive enough that people need help from professional services, and the services aren't going to be there to provide it. And that hurts me, because I know that the services that are out there are fantastic. So yes, the government should have pressed it more, but I don't expect that from them anymore. I expect the agency to come from us as individuals. And when people understand that no person can fix them unless they engage with a process, that's when we'll start to make progress.
Bob Seeley, the government will say that they have spent a lot more on mental health services, but it's I guess in some ways it's the sort of thing where you could spend an extra £10 billion and still you could make a case for spending a lot more. Is it just about money, or is it systems? Is it about parity of esteem?
Very possibly. Let me try to just make a couple of brief points to answer that. I'm just trying to throw some ideas together. Firstly, I pay great respect to Clarke's work. It is incredibly impressive, because it's a very difficult subject to talk about, and you have to be very morally courageous to do so. And I think the emotional literacy, absolutely, it just has to be embedded in the way that people grow up, and the way that you parent, the way that you educate. When it comes to money, I have to say, on the Isle of Wight, we're actually improving our mental health capacity, because we are now starting to share the uplift. So that shared uplift, where money is going to the NHS and mental health gets a cut of it, that is now happening. I was talking to my senior mental health professional on the island on Monday afternoon about this, and so she was saying that we are now getting that money. So we have more mental health support from, I think, Solent Mental Health, which is coming to support the island. So I can only talk about my patch, and there is actually improvement in capacity and mental health. The problem is, when you're starting off with a small base, let's say, again, I was talking about this with a couple of experts, when you've got two people who are going through an eating disorder unit, and because of the pandemic, that then goes up to 10 people a month you're dealing with. These are tiny figures by the standards of London, but when you've got a mental health capacity, an eating disorder capacity that can deal with 2 or 3 people a month, and you've suddenly tripled that, then even small amounts is going to be a problem. And what Clarke is saying is absolutely true. Again, we are expecting a sharp increase in the need for mental health services over the next 2 years, and then indirectly there are still going to be problems for the next 5 to 7 years. So we are going to need to plan that into what we do with the NHS. So finally, what Clarke was saying, it is about other things. We have some, like the Youth Trust on the island, for example, does amazing work with young people, and it does it outside the kids and young adults mental health services. So actually, it sometimes is finding stuff in the NHS, but also finding self-help groups outside of it as well. And in that, we are again improving things, admittedly probably from a low base, but we have some great outfits on the island that do just that.
Margaret, are you seeing any improvements in mental health services in your constituency, like Bob says he is?
Well, to be honest, not really. What I am seeing is growing concern. I mean, everything Clarke says, I would accept and support. Growing anxiety, growing need, and real anxiety from the professionals about their capacity to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Well, all I would say to your questioner, was it Jenny?
It was Jenny, yeah.
Is that I'm not sure whether it's. The thing about the Queen's speech, the limitations of the Queen's speech are that it's legislative, most of it. Although, yes, you do touch on other things that are important, but where you don't need a change in legislation. I'm not sure whether a major change in legislation is needed, although I'm open to advice that might be the case. But certainly, I do think. I'm afraid it's a real resource issue. And it's all very well to talk about parity of esteem, but I'm not sure we've ever really achieved it.
Oh, Dave, Margaret, if I could just jump in there. No, we've not even approached the first step of the ladder when we're getting on to parity of esteem. We're talking about the disparity of funding and resources. But when you talk about legislation, you know, the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 has it in there in black and white that personal injury is any disease or impairment of a person's physical or psychological being. That's been in there since 1974. To what degree have we taken physical safety in the workplace? Everyone puts their policy and strategy up and trains people and educates them. What about a workplace's mental health policy and strategy? Nowhere to be seen. You know, when it's Mental Health Awareness Week, everyone puts on lovely events that are optional. Physical health training isn't optional, it's mandatory. Do you know why? Because it's in the law. And it's in the law at a time where the writing actually says where an employer should train his employees. It still says his employees from a time when only men could run businesses. They've not even bothered to change the wording. So how can we expect them to change the funding to actually have equilibrium in this case?
And you made a very important point, Clarke, because although, I was saying it's not necessarily legislation. One of the things that we expected to see in the Queen's speech was a bill for employment rights, because the Prime Minister has been waxing lyrical about how much the government was going to improve workers' rights. And if there had been such a bill, it would have given you the opportunity and other people the legislative opportunity to make exactly those points and to draw attention to the needs to really implement what is on the statute book.
Mm-hmm. Joan, you're itching to get in.
Yeah, it's just that I think it is a resource problem. So in West London, where I live, before the pandemic, if you needed psychotherapy or an opportunity to have some kind of talking therapy, you would be referred to a charity, not part of the NHS. I mean, it's a very good local organisation, and people raise funds for it, but you're actually being sent to a charity, and they have a waiting list. And the waiting list before the pandemic was only 3 or 4 months. But if you have a serious depression or PTSD or something like that, it's quite a long time to wait, to get to see anybody. And now that we've got the pandemic, I'm sure things are going to be very much worse. So it is a resource problem.
That being said, Joan, if I can just jump in, one, I was so sceptical about technology, but at the beginning of the pandemic, my mood started to drop. I got in touch with the PFA because my wife told me to. She said, get another therapist. So I asked for a new therapist. I got a gentleman in London, Nick Mercer, who has totally transformed my journey. He's taken my mind space onto a new level, and that's through Zoom. So, even though to meet in physical person is going to be very restrictive, but the capacity might be aided if people are willing to engage via these technological advances.
Clarke, I was told before the programme that you were once voted the most intelligent footballer. Is that true?
No, it wasn't a vote. I won a competition. Come on, Ian, get it right. That has been ratified by Carol Vorderman, no less.
I don't argue with Carol Vorderman. Well, I think we've seen the evidence tonight that it's completely and utterly true. I'm just thinking, who would be the most intelligent politician that any of you have ever met?
Is that not an oxymoron?
Oh.
Ouch. I apologise profusely. Everyone says it about footballers, Day, Margaret.
Go on, Margaret. Who's the most intelligent politician you've ever met in this country or worldwide?
That's a hard one, actually. Genuinely, there are a lot of brilliant people. I'm slightly tempted to say Barack Obama, who I think is extremely. But I mean, there are lots of people. I mean, Gordon Brown is formidably intelligent and a powerful strategic thinker. Brian became a journalist.
Brian Sedgemore, Brian Gould,
Brian Walden.
Brian Walden.
Oh, Brian Walden.
Brian Walden was brilliant.
Yeah.
He was brilliant.
I remember applying for a job in his programme once and I didn't get it. Well, thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. Clarke Carlisle, Bob Seeley, Joan Smith and Margaret Beckett. If you missed any of the programme, you can catch up on the Cross Question podcast or, of course, watch it again on Global Player or YouTube. In a moment, we are going to talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has blown up again. 0345 6060 973. How can understanding be promoted across the two different sides? Because if they don't understand each other, there can never be a lasting solution, can there? I mean, it sounds a bit motherhood and apple pie, but we are going to talk to somebody who is in Israel trying to bring people together. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9:01.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the government has defended the timescale for starting the public inquiry into the handling of the coronavirus pandemic. The hearings, subject to a consultation of the scope of the process, are due to begin next spring. Labour has questioned why it can't start sooner. LBC's Westminster correspondent Ben Kentish says Boris Johnson argues it can't become a distraction from dealing with COVID-19.
That's when they believe we will be really out of the woods of this pandemic. Before then, they say there is still a risk of another wave. There is a likelihood, Boris Johnson put it, of a winter peak.